All right, so we are starting off with our first organ system of the semester, the integumentary system. Now, we've kind of touched on parts of the integumentary system already. If you remember from the previous chapter, we talked about body membranes. One of those body membranes was called the cutaneous membrane. Now, cutaneous membrane is another term for skin, and skin is one of the main portions of or locations of the integumentary system. The integumentary system can also be seen in oil and sweat glands, the sensory receptors found in the skin, and also hair and nails, right? So, again, cutaneous membrane, another term for skin. Just some fun facts about skin because this is the largest organ in the body and it is the main part of the integumentary system that we'll be focusing on. So, just some fun facts. It can, on the average adult, it can cover up to 22 square feet, weighs about 11 pounds, and basically makes up 7% of the average adult's body weight, which is so crazy. Um, It varies in thickness all throughout the body, and we'll talk about that more as we dive into the skin. But let's talk about functions. So, when we talk about functions of the integumentary system, we are focusing on the skin because, again, that is the largest part of this system. Okay, so first off, we have thermal regulation, and this is all about maintaining homeostatic range within the body. Okay, so we are maintaining the body's temperature. So the body's temperature may increase above normal range. It could, and then, we need to have some sort of feedback loop in line to decrease it, or it could decrease, and then we have to have a feedback loop that helps increase it, right? So it's just a homeostatic pattern following one of those negative feedback loops. All right. Now, ways that we can control the temperature of the body is through vasoconstriction and vasodilation. With vasodilation, we're talking about in the blood vessels, we would be releasing heat. Okay, so those blood vessels would be, the diameter would be getting larger. And then with vasoconstriction, those blood vessels, the diameter would be getting smaller, and that would conserve heat in the body. But we can also see thermoregulation with sweat glands. So when sweat glands release their product, their sweat, that's going to evaporate off of the skin and essentially cool the body down. The sweat will trap heat molecules from the skin, and then as it evaporates, the body cools. Also referring to sweat glands, the one of the functions of the body or of the integumentary system, the skin, is waste excretion via sweat from, again, those sweat glands. So, sweat is going to have a bunch of different chemicals like lactic acid or urea. All of that is going to be eliminated in sweat. It can also have some like metals, being excreted as well. Now, sweat glands aren't the main structure or organ where toxins are removed, right? The kidneys, the liver, a lot of those organs in the abdomen are also going to be assisting with removing these harmful toxics, but sweat glands, they do make a significant contribution to maintaining the body's health. The skin will also help maintain body shape and integrity. And then, probably more importantly, it protects the body. It is a literal barrier. That is one part of the immune system, is having this physical barrier to prevent different pathogens and foreign invaders from entering the body. And also, pretty cool thing is because of the sweat, excreted onto our skin, it actually changes the pH of our skin at times. And that change in pH, it kind of makes it more acidic, and that is harmful to some bacteria. So again, protecting the sweat glands, really, really important. Okay. Also, incredibly important function of the skin is vitamin D synthesis, so the creation of vitamin D. And this is done in multiple steps, but it starts in the skin. So there is kind of it's a compound similar to cholesterol, and once it interacts with UV rays, which we all interact with by just going outside, it basically enacts this entire process. The compound, the cholesterol-like compound, when triggered by UV rays, gets converted into an inactive vitamin D form, and then it goes into the bloodstream, and then it gets modified by the liver, modified by the kidneys, and then it becomes calcitrol, and that is the active form of vitamin D. And so this is incredibly important because vitamin D is required for the small intestine so that calcium ions can be absorbed. And we need calcium in the body for nerve function, muscle contractions. A lot of metabolic processes require calcium. So vitamin D synthesis starting in the skin is going to contribute to the absorption of calcium ions. And then lastly, one of the functions would be sensory receptors. So just being able to interact with the outside world through sensations, and then being able to process said sensations via different receptors found in the skin. That is another function. So let's look at the skin, okay? So we know that the skin is called the cutaneous membrane, okay? The skin itself, the cutaneous membrane, is composed of the epidermis and the dermis. So there are actually two major layers of the skin, but we also have this subcutaneous layer, which I've kind of alluded to in previous chapters. This is also the subcutaneous membrane is also, or tissue is also referred to as the hypodermis. Okay, so having all three of these, the two skin layers, the two layers of the cutaneous membrane plus the subcutaneous membrane equals something we just call the integument. So if we're saying skin, we're just referring to epidermis and dermis. If we're saying the integument, we're referring to all three portions, including that hypodermal layer. Okay, so if you're having trouble kind of remembering how things are ordered, remember that EPI means above, so above the dermis. And then if you're looking at the common name of the subcutaneous level, which is the hypodermis, hypo meaning below or underneath. So we could see epi above the dermis and hypo below the dermis, and dermis would be sitting right there in the middle. All right, now when we look at these layers of the integument, we also have to understand what type of tissues are found here. Okay, so in the epidermis, we have either 4 or 5 layers, or sometimes called strata. If it was individual layers, it would be a stratum. Okay, but if we're talking about them in plural, strata. Okay, and all of those strata are going to be composed of keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelial tissue. Moving down to the dermis actually has 2 layers itself, about 1/3 of the dermis towards the superior portion, towards the epidermis, right, is called the papillary layer, and that is going to be composed of areolar connective tissue, or we should really be saying loose areolar connective tissue. Okay, the remaining 2/3 of the dermis is composed of the reticular layer. Now, this is confusing. just because it's called the reticular layer does not mean that it will have loose reticular connective tissue, okay? It actually is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. So the reticular layer of the dermis is composed of dense, irregular connective tissue. And then the hypodermis, or the subcutaneous membrane, is composed of adipose connective tissue, loose adipose connective tissue, and loose areolar connective tissue. All right, so we can always identify the hypodermis, again, because it is mainly composed of loose adipose connective tissue, which is the fat tissue. And we can see those that fat tissue always kind of represented by kind of like little yellow bubbles almost. And they're always going to be found deep to the dermis. All right, so this is one of the more important slides here because it labels the skin, the integument really well. A lot of different structures going on here. We do need to know all of them, okay? So let's just start over here on the right-hand side of the image. We have the epidermis, okay? Again, we need to know the type of tissue that it's composed of. We have the dermis. The two different layers here are being represented. So you can see 1/3 with the papillary region and 2/3 with the reticular region. And we can also see the subcutaneous layer, also called the hypodermis. You should be able to recognize it as both ways. And also labeled here, we have throughout the skin and the subcutaneous layer, we have different blood vessels. Typically, in anatomy, blue will represent a vein and red will represent an artery. And that statement should have an asterisk next to it. And once we get to the cardiovascular system, you will understand why. All right, so let's go on over to the left-hand side of this image so that we can identify some of these actual structures. All right, so starting us off in the, it's actually in the papillary region of the dermis, we have dermal papillae, and they kind of look like hills, okay, like little tiny hills. All right, so these are the portions of the papillary region. You can see the papillary region kind of has like these little hills along the side of it. If we take the epidermis off, we can see those dermal papillae really clearly. All right, so this is at the surface of the papillary layer. Basically, they're going to house a bunch of different capillaries, which are tiny little blood vessels, and you can kind of see how they're looped. I do have it crossed off. It's just kind of important, I think, to recognize, but I'm not going to test you on it. So remember that epidermis, made of epithelial tissue, is avascular, and connective tissue making up the dermis is vascular. So having this capillary loop in the dermal papillae really close to the epidermis, really close to that avascular epithelial tissue, that's where we're going to have that transfer of oxygen and nutrients diffusing into the epidermis. And then vice versa, it would also be picking up waste products as well. So the dermal papillae really just kind of increase the surface area for that, gaseous exchange of obviously oxygen and carbon dioxide, but then also that transfer of nutrients and waste products as well. So they're increasing the surface area. They also will press onto the epidermis, which helps promote the fingerprints that we see. So having that kind of ridge is going to kind of transfer up onto our epidermis, and we can actually see the fingerprints. Okay, now The fingerprint is really, made of the epidermal ridges, but the dermal papillae with those dermal ridges kind of play into um, the creation of fingerprints. All right, so moving down our list, we can see, let's jump down to here. We have eccrine sweat gland and apocrine sweat gland. So if we remember from comparing exocrine and endocrine glands, we were focusing on exocrine in this semester's course. So those glands are going to be secreting actual products through ducts. And if we I remember looking at the multicellular glands and viewing their structure. When we looked at sweat glands, they were really coiled, okay? And so that's what we can see here. The sweat glands, again, very coiled. And you can see that it runs up and distributes its product via a sweat pore, okay, onto the epidermis. We do have other glands here, like the sebaceous gland. So the sebaceous gland, also a multicellular gland, is going to be hanging off hair follicles. So we can always associate our sebaceous gland with a hair follicle, and we can see it over here as well on this hair follicle. So a sebaceous gland is an oil gland, and oil gets secreted via the hair follicle where the terminal hair comes out through the skin. There's also a pore for oil or sebum. Sebum is the secretion of a sebaceous gland. Okay, so we can obviously then see the hair follicle with the hair root, more internal, anchored into the dermis, right? The erector pili muscle is connected to that hair follicle. When you get goosebumps and your hair sticks up, or you're, stimulated in some sense, maybe you're scared or you're excited or you're touched emotionally or something, right? Like sometimes I hear a song and I get goosebumps or something like that. The erector pili is going to pull on the hair follicle, making it stand erect. So erector pili muscle makes the hair follicle stand erect. Okay, and then the remaining structures here labeled are receptors, sensory receptors. So we have the Meissner corpuscle and we have the lamellated corpuscle. Now, the Meissner corpuscle is also sometimes just called like a tactile receptor or a touch receptor. It's going to be located in the papillary region, and so it's going to detect really light touch. The lamellated corpuscle, otherwise called the Pacinian corpuscle, both are right. These are going to be found deep in the reticular region of the dermis, and sometimes even in the subcutaneous layer, the hypodermis. These guys are going to respond and detect really deep pressure stimuli onto the skin, and that kind of plays into why they are located so deep in the integument.